Hi, I'm Kalis. My sister slammed a plate of spaghetti over my head right in front of a packed restaurant. Then she laughed. And my stepmother? She leaned in and said, well, maybe now she understands her place. They thought I'd cry. They thought I'd run. But I just wiped my face and smiled because I knew something they didn't. And when the truth hit them, they didn't laugh. They froze. Before we dive in, tell me this. Have you ever been humiliated by the people who were supposed to love you most? Tell me in the comments. I read every word. Now, let me show you what happened next. They say spring softens the edges of life. In Charlotte, that means blooming dogwoods and warm breezes slipping through screen doors. But inside Brookside Grill, spring just meant another Thursday night on my feet. I tied my apron tighter and slid the register drawer shut. The soft hum of country music played from the back, barely audible over the clink of forks and low chatter. I worked evenings, 6 nights a week, and kept the day shifts open for classes I hoped to afford someday, if I could squirrel away enough tips. I wasn't dreaming of grandeur, just a certification in small business accounting. Maybe then I could stop worrying about counting every penny like it was a prayer. Carmen, the owner, walked past with a fresh basket of cornbread. Got a new table out front. Be sweet, she said with a wink. I always am. I smiled, though my cheeks already ached. Then my phone buzzed in my apron. I pulled it out discreetly, screen cracked but still loyal. A message from Elaine, my stepmother. Your sister wants to celebrate her raise tonight. We're coming, 7:30. No greeting, no, how are you? Just a cold announcement like I was the concierge of their little victory party. I stood there a second too long, thumbs still on the screen. My stomach tightened, not from nerves, but from something older, heavier, the feeling of knowing you're being summoned, not invited. I turned back toward the dining room, plastering on that waitress smile. One table laughed loudly near the window, another asked for extra lemon wedges. I moved through the motions like muscle memory, but my thoughts started slipping back. It had been 8 years since I walked away from a promising corporate internship, one my family bragged about endlessly, just so I could care for Grandma June in her final months. No one else stepped up. They were all too busy. But when I told them I'd withdrawn from the program, Elaine looked at me like I'd killed someone. You threw away your future for a dying woman, she'd said. Who's going to respect you after this? My father hadn't said a word. And Callista, well, she laughed. Now Callista was the shining star, marketing executive at some health tech startup, always posting filtered selfies with inspirational captions like "hustle harder" or "secure the bag." Meanwhile, I wiped tables and prayed the fryer didn't go out again. 7:26 p.m. I refreshed my lip gloss in the employee restroom, just enough to look presentable, not enough to pretend I cared. At 7:31, they entered like they owned the place. Callista, in a tight red wrap dress and stilettos that had no business on Brookside's sticky floor. Elaine was behind her, pearls and attitude in place. My father trailed last, distracted by his phone. They brought friends too, laughing, loud ones. Callista scanned the room like she expected to be applauded. God, this place is smaller than I remember, she said to one of the girls beside her. But hey, my little sister's still here? They still haven't promoted you from napkin folder? Her voice rang out like a school bell, the kind that made everyone stop and turn. I smiled politely and guided them to a booth. Glad you could make it, I said. Callista laughed. Of course, wouldn't miss celebrating myself. Elaine leaned over to a woman in beige beside her. Poor thing, she whispered, not quietly enough. She's stuck. I brought waters, then menus, then their drinks. I didn't shake, didn't stutter, just kept moving, pretending their words rolled off like water on vinyl. But it wasn't water. It was acid, familiar, sharp. When I brought their entrees, Callista looked at her plate like I'd served her poison. Is this Caesar? She demanded. Yes, I said calmly. No anchovy, just like the kitchen usually makes it. She scowled. I said light dressing. This is soaked. Ugh. I reached to take the plate back, but she slapped her palm on the table. No. You know what? She grabbed the plate, stood up, and with a smile, dumped the salad straight onto my head. It happened so fast, I couldn't react. Oil and romaine slid down my hair, over my shoulders, onto the floor. One of her friends gasped, then burst into laughter. Elaine covered her mouth, half hiding her own smirk. My father. He just looked away. Maybe now she understands her place, Elaine said, dabbing her lips with her napkin like nothing had happened. The room went silent. Other diners froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Carmen's head popped out from the kitchen, eyes wide. But I didn't move, until I saw it. One small, crumpled cream napkin that had fallen on my shoe. I reached down, wiped my face as best I could, and stood tall. No tears, no words. I turned and walked slowly toward the back room, every step heavy, every eye on my back. Inside the break room, I closed the door gently, not slamming it, not screaming, just breathing. One breath, then another. Rage and shame tangled in my chest, but underneath that, something else stirred. A memory of Grandma June telling me once, "Sometimes the quiet ones don't stay quiet forever." They thought that was the end of me, but I was just beginning. The smell hit me the second I stepped inside. Vinegar and shame. It clung to my skin, soaked into my clothes, followed me like a shadow I hadn't invited home. I peeled off my uniform slowly, shirt first, then apron, then shoes that squished with leftover dressing. One sock was wetter than the other. Somehow, that felt like the final insult. I didn't cry, not when the salad hit my head, not when Elaine snickered. Now she understands her place, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. Not when I locked myself in the supply room just to breathe. But now, standing in my tiny bathroom, with the broken fan buzzing overhead and the light flickering like it couldn't make up its mind, something inside me began to crack. I turned on the shower and stepped in before it even heated. Cold water slapped my skin. I scrubbed hard. Not just my hair, but my scalp, my neck, my arms. Like if I scrubbed hard enough, I could erase the way they looked at me, the sound of Callista's laughter, the feel of vinaigrette trickling down my collarbone. I stood under the stream longer than I needed to, hands pressed against the tile. My thoughts replayed the moment again and again, the glint in Callista's eyes before she overturned the plate, Elaine's smug whisper, and the silence of the restaurant as the laughter faded, and I walked away with a napkin in my hand like a flag of surrender. But it hadn't been surrender. It had been a choice. I stepped out and wrapped myself in my oldest towel, the edges frayed from years of use. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bark from the neighbor's dog downstairs. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, my wet hair dripping a trail behind me, and poured a glass of water with shaky hands. The clock on the microwave read 9:42 p.m. I sat at my tiny dining table, really just an old desk I'd rescued from a thrift shop, and stared at the empty chair across from me. Grandma Ruth used to sit there. She'd visit every Wednesday when I first moved in. We'd eat sandwiches and talk about nothing and everything. The last thing she ever told me was, "Don't let people define your worth, Kalis. You're not their mirror." Then she touched my cheek, smiled with all the love the rest of the world forgot to give me, and said, "You're already enough." She believed that even when no one else did, when I dropped out of my internship to care for her during chemo, they called me weak. My father didn't even show up at the hospital once. Callista called me the dropout with a savior complex. Elaine said it was typical of someone who couldn't handle the real world. But Grandma? She taught me how to listen, really listen. Not just to words, but to people, their habits, their needs, their silence. That's why, twice a week after my shift, I volunteered at the community center. I never told anyone, not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't for them. I taught basic budgeting to single moms and seniors on fixed incomes. We'd sit in plastic chairs under flickering lights, talking about credit cards and grocery bills, but more than that, about choices, about dignity, They were just like me, tired, stretched thin, trying to make something work with too little. Tonight, though, I didn't go. I couldn't. Instead, I opened my laptop to check in with the center, expecting the usual update about the supply closet or reminder about next week's lesson. What I saw stopped me, an email with the subject, Private Inquiry, Pilot Funding Proposal. I blinked, opened it. Hi, Kalis, it read. One of our visiting donors stopped by during your last session and was impressed with the impact of your work. He's a private equity consultant and asked for your contact information. He's interested in funding a small-scale pilot of your program in Charlotte. Can we connect you on Monday? My eyes scanned the message 3 more times, just to be sure I wasn't misreading it. Someone noticed? Not because I shouted, not because I begged for attention, but because I did something quietly, and it mattered? I sat back in my chair, the hum of the fridge suddenly louder than before. My heart thudded against my ribs. I wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear, but it was something real. The urge to text Callista surged. Just one sentence. You threw lettuce. I built something. Or maybe, watch this space. Something petty, sharp. But I didn't. Instead, I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The same mirror I'd avoided since moving in, too many bad hair days and puffy eyes after long shifts. I looked at my reflection. Not glamorous, not perfect, just still standing. You've messed with the wrong failure, I whispered, and it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. I walked back to the kitchen and grabbed a sticky note from the little pad I kept next to the microwave. I wrote 5 words. 2 weeks. Let them laugh. I stuck it on the fridge door, right next to a grocery list I never finished. Then I exhaled, the first breath of something new forming in my chest. 2 weeks. That's all I needed. Not to forget, but to get sharper, calmer, more dangerous in silence. The clatter of pans echoed through the restaurant kitchen, bouncing off metal walls and overhead vents. My body moved on autopilot, slicing, plating, scrubbing, but my mind was far from the ticket line or the sizzle of oil. My hands worked quickly, precisely. I didn't flinch when someone brushed past, didn't react when 2 of the waitresses whispered as they passed behind me. I'd gotten used to the stares, the sideways glances that said, "That's her." I wore them like another layer of skin now. What used to sting had settled into something more solid, dull but permanent. What still ached, though, what never seemed to fade, was the bruise on my shoulder. Faint now, but deep. Not from the fall, like everyone assumed, but from the moment Callista shoved me that night, just off camera, just out of the crowd's view. Her hand had dug into my skin like she wanted to erase me from the room, and maybe she thought she had. But the sting of that touch didn't erase me. It branded me. It reminded me of something older. A hiss rose from the stovetop, caramelized onions browning too fast. I moved quickly to turn the heat down, but the smell, that deep, bittersweet char, pulled something loose inside me. Suddenly, I was 12 again. It was a Sunday morning. Brunch at our house had always been a big deal. My stepmother, Marlene, would put on a show like she was hosting a segment on morning TV, aprons with lace, mimosa glasses, classical music, humming low in the background. We weren't allowed to speak above a certain tone, and we certainly weren't allowed to make mistakes. That morning, she let me try the griddle for the first time. I wanted to impress her, but I was nervous, and when I flipped the pancake, it folded wrong and landed half burnt, half raw. She didn't miss a beat. In front of her friends, without lowering her voice, she said, "No wonder her real mother left. She can't even flip a pancake." The room erupted in light laughter. Callista giggled too, that high, rehearsed tone of a child mimicking cruelty. I stood there frozen, spatula in hand, face burning hotter than the stove. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I just walked away, fists clenched so tight I left nail marks in my palm. In my room, I stared at my reflection and told myself, next time, don't give them the satisfaction. That wasn't the last insult Marlene threw my way, but it was the first one that taught me what public humiliation felt like when it wore a smile. Back in the present, the scent faded, replaced by lemon cleaner and fryer grease. I snapped back to now, to the hiss of the kitchen, the shuffle of feet, the pressure of time. As I lifted a tray of baked tilapia, the edge slipped and the corner brushed my forearm. I gasped quietly, more from surprise than pain. The tray clanged against the prep counter. Before I could grab a towel, someone was already beside me. "You okay?" came a voice. Low, gentle, not rushed. Jamil, the dishwasher. Mid-40s, quiet, worked 2 jobs, always nodded but rarely spoke more than a sentence a day. He handed me a damp towel, not looking for drama or gossip, just kindness. "I'm good," I said, trying to smile. He nodded once and went back to the sink. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, towel pressed to my arm, staring at the tray. It's strange how sometimes the smallest act of decency can hit harder than cruelty. Not because it hurts, but because it reminds you that goodness still exists. It breaks the habit of bracing for pain. It reminds you you're human. When my shift ended, I clocked out without a word, changed in the cramped back locker room, and stepped out into the dusky air. The ride home was quiet, just the low hum of the bus and my own breath keeping me company. At home, I dropped my keys in the bowl, peeled off my shoes, and sat at the little table by the window. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the notebook. It was worn soft from years of use, college ruled, with a blue spine and corners that curled like old leaves. I'd had it since high school. Its pages held more truth than any family photo album ever could. I flipped to a blank page and began to write. "They never broke me," I scribbled. "They just delayed me." I paused, my pen hovering, then flipped back, past sketches, budgeting notes, scraps of dreams. And then I found it, a page dated 6 years ago. My handwriting was neater then, more hopeful. "I'll create something that gives power to women who've been told to shut up, sit down, and smile through it." Beneath that line, in thick ink, I'd written, "Project Balance." I'd almost forgotten that name. It had come to me in the middle of a college economics seminar of all places, back when I still believed in plans. But the seed had been buried under obligations, family emergencies, and 1,000 small humiliations. Now, sitting there with the bruise fading from my shoulder and the words fresh on the page, I whispered the name again like a vow. Project Balance. I wasn't sure what it would become, but I knew one thing. It would start with me, and it would not ask for permission. After rinsing off and changing into an oversized shirt, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up the website for the community nonprofit where I'd been teaching free budgeting classes. I'd started browsing grant databases, searching for anything, even microfunding, that could help turn Project Balance from an idea into something tangible. The night had grown quiet around me. Streetlights glowed outside, and the city's buzz had softened into background hum. Then I saw it. On the nonprofit's blog, beneath a photo of last week's class, a group of women in folding chairs, all smiling, notebooks in hand, there was a single comment. "Is that the same Kaylis from Everhart High? Wow, I'd like to speak with her. BH." My heart skipped once. Twice. I hadn't seen those initials, or even thought about them, in almost 20 years. For a while, I just stared at the screen, like it was some trick of memory. But there it was, plain as day. BH. And beneath that, the comment, "Is that the same Kaylis from Everhart High? Wow, I'd like to speak with her. Brandon Huxley." A name I hadn't said out loud since I was 17. A face I hadn't seen since the day we both sat outside detention, awkward and quiet, with nothing to say but too much sitting between us. I hovered my thumb over the comment, debating. Part of me wanted to click, the other part hesitated. What if he was just another person reaching out for the wrong reasons? I'd had enough of being used, judged, misunderstood. But curiosity won. His profile wasn't locked. I clicked through. A professional headshot, a clean page with not much personal content, but the words that stood out made me sit up. Strategist for impact-driven ventures, speaker, advisor, community equity advocate. And one line in bold under the current city, Chicago, IL, in town for alumni roundtable. 3 days later, I found myself walking into a small cafe just off South Ellis. Not the kind of spot you'd pick for show, no fancy lighting or overpriced pastries, just wood-paneled booths, warm light, and the smell of cinnamon and dark roast. He was already there. Brandon stood when he saw me. A fitted navy jacket, pressed shirt, dark curls now tamed with age. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still with that soft, observant look in his eyes. But there was something steadier in him now. A stillness, like he'd grown into the quiet boy he used to be. "Kalis," he said, offering a smile. "It's been a long time." "Yeah," I replied, slipping into the seat across from him. Didn't think anyone from Everhard even remembered me. He shook his head, amused. "I remembered. You were the only one who ever submitted real art to that school contest. Everyone else drew cheerleaders and dogs. You painted grief." I didn't respond right away. Hearing someone remember that version of me, it unsettled something. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. "You said you saw me through the nonprofit page?" Brandon nodded. A link showed up in a reunion recap. I was reading through alumni projects. Then I saw the video. What happened at the restaurant? My back tensed. That footage had gone further than I ever expected. I tried to keep my tone even. Wasn't exactly how I wanted to be remembered. He leaned forward, his voice low. "They think they humiliated you. What they really did was wake up the people watching." I blinked. He reached into his bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "You ever hear of community capital accelerators? I help people get their ventures funded, especially women-led ones that have been ignored." I hesitated, fingers brushing the folder edge. "I always believed you'd do something big," he said, "but I think you need support now, not applause, not pity, real backing." I looked at him for a long moment. "Why me?" "Because when we were 16, you were the only person in that school who didn't pretend, and because I remember what Callista did to your sketch in class. Everyone laughed. You didn't. You fought back with silence and paint." I hadn't thought about that in years. The memory flickered back, Callista's voice slicing through the classroom, mocking the way I shaded the lines on my mother's portrait, calling it dead eyes. Then she tore the paper clean down the center. The teacher barely blinked. Brandon had stood up, trembling, voice cracking, and told the teacher it was bullying. We both ended up in detention, and neither of us ever talked about it again. Now, he sat in front of me, not as the boy who risked being laughed at, but as a man who moved through the world with deliberate purpose. After we finished coffee, I thanked him and walked home. The air was cooler than it looked. I pulled my coat tighter, folder tucked under my arm like it might blow away if I loosened my grip. At home, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and turned on the small lamp beside the couch. Then I opened the folder again. His proposal was clear, structured. It wasn't charity. It was strategy. And yet, something inside me hesitated. Could I really trust someone again? After years of being second-guessed, sidelined, betrayed, even by my own blood? I reached for the notebook on the end table, the one I'd carried since college. The pages were worn, but the words inside still held pieces of me no one else had touched. I flipped to a page I hadn't read in a while. The top corner was dated, May 22nd, age 23. "Trust isn't blind. It's earned over time and tested under pressure." My handwriting back then was sharper, more angular, like I was still trying to prove something with every line. I closed my eyes, sat back, and let my breath settle. There was a pulse of something stirring beneath the surface, uneasy but alive. Project Balance. The name still carried weight in my bones. I turned back to the final page of Brandon's folder. At the bottom, in clean type, was a short note. "If you say yes, we meet the investors Monday." I stared at that last sentence for hours, until I circled one word in pen, yes. I circled yes at 1:43 a.m., and the next morning, like clockwork, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen on my screen in months. Callista. I stared at the message for a while, not even opening it right away. Just seeing her name again made something knot in my stomach, like an old bruise being pressed. When I finally clicked it open, the text was short. "Family dinner, tomorrow night. Dad wants everyone there. Bring something nice." No emoji, no "hope you're well." Just a command, as if nothing had happened, as if I was still the black sheep on standby for their theater productions. I almost laughed. Really? Now they wanted to play family? I didn't respond. Not immediately. I got up, made myself a piece of toast I didn't finish, and stood by the window, watching the traffic move like veins through the neighborhood. Something about the timing felt too clean, too scripted. By noon, I called Brandon. He answered on the first ring. "They're pulling something," I said. He didn't ask for details, just waited. I explained the message, the sudden invite, the sudden warmth. "They want you to feel welcomed. Just long enough to put you back in your place," Brandon said quietly. "I saw the pitch numbers this morning. People are sharing it everywhere. That means your name's floating again." And they noticed. I leaned against the wall. My kitchen still smelled faintly of burnt toast. "So what should I do?" He paused, then said, "Go. But don't talk about the project, not a word. They want control, not conversation. Just listen, observe, smile." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. I knew he was right. The last time I let my guard down around them, I ended up in tears, and on the local news, humiliated with a wine-soaked lap and a frozen smile. Later that night, I pulled an old notebook from my shelf, one I hadn't touched since my early 20s. I flipped through it, aimless, until my eye caught a page I didn't even remember writing. People don't always stab you in the back. Sometimes they smile first. I closed the notebook and set it on my coffee table. This time, I'd be ready. The following evening arrived faster than I wanted. I dressed in a simple navy wrap dress and slipped on the only heels I still owned. Nothing flashy, but clean, dignified. I wasn't going there to impress anyone, just to look them in the eye. The doorman at Callista's new building barely glanced at me before buzzing me up. Her penthouse was all glass and ego, floor-to-ceiling windows, velvet bar stools, and a chandelier that probably cost more than my car. The door was already open when I stepped out of the elevator. Callista greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You made it," she sang, like this was some kind of victory. "I got your message," I replied. She stepped aside, her perfume a cloud of expensive lavender. Inside, everything was curated, even the guests. Dad was there, already nursing a drink. Marlene, my stepmother, was draped over a chaise lounge like a bored heiress. A few cousins I barely recognized were clustered around the kitchen island, laughing too hard at something on a phone. Callista handed me a glass of white wine. I didn't drink it. "So," she said, her voice lilting, "what do you do these days, Kalis? Still waitressing?" I smiled. "Not quite." Marlene raised an eyebrow. "Any boyfriends, or is that too much pressure?" I turned to her. "Still married to your third husband, or are we back to maiden names?" Her smile cracked for just a second. I didn't push it. Just sipped water and watched. Dinner was served around a long, modern table, the kind where no one makes eye contact unless they're sizing you up. The food was exquisite. Of course. Callista never did anything unless it looked good in pictures. The conversation danced like razors. "So glad you're finally rejoining the family," someone murmured. "We all have to grow up sometime," Marlene added. My father cleared his throat. "Kalis," he said, voice deep, rehearsed. "There's something we need you to sign tonight. It's just a formality, something your mother left behind in the old estate file." He reached down, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. I glanced at it. My name was misspelled, a small detail but glaring. Worse, it wasn't even the name I used now. It was my childhood nickname, one only my mother used. Something tightened behind my ribs. Callista leaned in, her smile too sweet. "Just a signature, sis. We're all doing it. Keeping things simple for Dad." I picked up the folder. The paper inside was thick, official, but not familiar, and right there, just beneath the bolded header, was a line that said, Termination of heirship. Effective retroactive disinheritance clause. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I didn't say a word as I stared at the folder. My name was there, sure, but spelled wrong. It wasn't just a typo, it was deliberate. They used my childhood nickname, the one only my mom ever called me, but altered, twisted, like a ghost of me, a version they could legally erase. I looked up. The dining room lights reflected off the polished mahogany table. My father didn't meet my eyes. His fork scraped across his plate like he hadn't just signed away the last thing that connected me to my mother. Marlene poured herself another glass of wine, swirling it slowly. Callista smiled, wide, rehearsed. "It's just paperwork, sis," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom wouldn't have wanted conflict." That word, conflict, curled in my chest like smoke. They were asking me to sign away land that was never theirs to begin with. The land Mom whispered would always be mine. "It's old deed stuff," Marlene added, brushing invisible lint off her silk blouse. "We're just tidying up loose ends." I held the paper up. The text was heavy with legal phrasing. Somewhere in the middle, it read, "This amendment hereby nullifies any implied or unregistered claim made by Kalis Grace Weller to the property known as..." I felt a pressure behind my eyes, hot, quiet. I read the sentence twice. My father's signature was there, dated last week, a notary stamp already pressed beside it. "So you just need to sign there." Callista pointed to the dotted line, her manicured finger tapping the spot like she was guiding a child through a school form. "Then we can all move on." I pushed the folder away. "Can I use the restroom?" Marlene raised an eyebrow. "Of course, down the hall, on the right." I stood, legs steady only because I'd practiced that kind of stillness for years. Behind the bathroom door, I locked the latch. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't fear. It was something older, deeper. Grief that had calcified. I splashed water on my face. The mirror was lit from above, cold and clinical. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone who'd finally seen too much. Mom once told me in that overgrown garden behind our old place, her voice low so Marlene wouldn't hear, "This land will be yours, Kalis, no matter what they say. You understand?" I was 12. I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. Back then, that garden felt like a kingdom. Wild lavender, tangled rose bushes, a tiny bench where I'd sit and draw. Mom loved that space. It was the only place we were ever alone. Now they wanted to pretend it never happened, pretend she never said it, erase the promise with a few strokes of ink. I stared into the mirror. "No more," I whispered. My voice was hoarse. "You don't get to take everything." I dried my hands and walked out, calm, composed, not because I wasn't burning inside, but because I needed them to believe they'd won. Back at the table, I smiled, sat down slowly. "Thanks for dinner," I said softly, folding the document and sliding it back across the table. "Oh?" Marlene asked, her wine glass midair. "I'll have my attorney review it before I sign anything." Callista blinked. "Why? It's just a formality." "Then it can wait," I cut in gently. "If it's nothing, no harm done." Dad still didn't look at me. His hand moved toward his glass, shaking slightly. I stood up. "I'll see myself out." "You're being dramatic," Callista called after me. But I didn't stop. The elevator ride down was quiet. My reflection in the chrome walls stared back, different somehow. I wasn't sure when that change had happened. Maybe it was tonight. Maybe it started years ago, in that garden. By the time I stepped back into my apartment, the silence felt sharper. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked straight to the hall closet and pulled down a wooden box from the top shelf. It was scratched and old. Mom gave it to me the week before she died. "Don't open it unless you have to," she'd said. "But if they ever come for what's yours, it's all in there." I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and opened the lid. Inside, a sealed envelope, yellowing at the edges, and beneath it, a notarized letter with a gold-embossed stamp. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs. It confirmed the existence of an updated will. The official registered copy was in the envelope. I broke the seal. The document was clean, precise. And there it was, at the bottom of the final page, in clear typed font, I leave my full estate, including all property, rights, and holdings, solely to my daughter, Kalis Grace Weller. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I let out a sound I hadn't made in years. Half laughter, half something else. Maybe grief. Maybe justice waking up. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I didn't remember. But Mom did. It was almost 2 in the morning. The city outside my apartment window was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. I sat at my kitchen table, the opened will spread before me like some forgotten map to a future my mother had once tried to protect. It didn't just leave me the land. It named me the sole heir to everything. The ink had faded slightly with time, but the intent was crystal clear. Her handwriting, looping, elegant, and strong, danced across the page. Property, heirlooms, assets, all of it in my name. Not a single mention of Callista, not a word about Marlene, not even Dad, just me. She'd dated it a year before she passed. I hadn't even known she was that sick at the time, but she must have known. She must have known they would try to erase me the moment she was gone. I stared at the notary's stamp again. It was real, fully authenticated. But one line chilled me to my core: to be submitted to probate upon my passing. And it never had been. I exhaled slowly, stood, and walked over to the wooden box where I'd first found the envelope. I'd kept it tucked under my bed for years without touching it. Some strange, instinctive need to hold on to it, even when I didn't know what was inside. She knew. She always knew. I didn't sleep that night, just paced, read, reread, and ran my fingers over her signature like it was a lifeline. I waited until the sky lightened, until the city began to stir, until the coffee shops opened. Then I called Mr. Ellis Granger. He used to come by the coffee shop I worked at when I was 25, always in the same seat by the window. Black coffee, 1 sugar. No nonsense. I once memorized his order by the second visit. He once tipped me $20 when I remembered his anniversary before he did. "Kalis?" he answered, voice rough from sleep but alert. "Mr. Granger, I need to show you something. It's urgent. It's about my mother's will." There was a pause, a beat of silence that told me he remembered who I was. Then, calm and steady, "Come by the office. I'll make tea." By 9:30, I was sitting in his office, a soft clink of porcelain between us, as he poured Earl Grey into 2 ceramic mugs. He looked older, but his eyes were still sharp behind those silver frames. I placed the documents in front of him. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the pages slowly, then again. The 3rd time, he sat back and let out a low breath. "You have no idea what you're holding." I didn't respond, just waited. "This, if verified, overrides any subsequent claims. If no probate was filed for this document, then legally it could nullify anything that came after, unless they prove your mother was under duress or not of sound mind. She was a nurse. She was sharper than most of her doctors." He nodded. "Then this is serious." I leaned forward. "What do I do?" He paused, tapping a knuckle against his desk. "First, we file. Quietly. No drama. Let the court review the document's validity. You don't tell anyone until we've secured standing." I nodded. "That's what I want." He studied me for a long moment. "Kalis, I've seen families destroy each other over heirlooms, over garden tools, for heaven's sake. This is land, a house, bank accounts, and power." "I'm not trying to destroy them," I said, my voice calm. "But I won't let them erase me either." Granger tilted his head, the edge of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You've changed since you poured my coffee." I had to. He pushed a few papers toward me. "Sign here to initiate the petition. The rest, I'll take care of." When I stood to leave, he said quietly, "Just prepare yourself. They'll fight dirty." I met his eyes. I was raised in their storm. I know how to be thunder. The ride home was quiet. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just looked out the window, watched the city blur by, and held the will close to my chest inside a thick folder. At home, I tucked it back into the wooden box and slid it beneath the floorboard under my bed. Just for now. Then I went back to work like nothing had happened. I answered emails, led meetings, even helped Marlene with a logistics issue at the gallery like we were just two sisters who'd shared dessert the night before and not a legal ambush. By Wednesday, Callista texted, "Thought about signing yet?" I replied, "Thanks again for dinner." No more, no less. Let them laugh. Let them think I was retreating again. Let them whisper behind my back about how I always cracked under pressure, because this time, I wasn't cracking. I was sealing every fracture tight, and I was planning. Granger called me again the following Tuesday evening. "The court accepted the petition. We're scheduled for hearing in 3 weeks. I stood in the middle of my living room, the phone warm against my cheek. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until the walls they'd built around their lies started to shake. I didn't say much, just let out a soft exhale, then whispered to myself, "Let them laugh while they still can." Because when that gavel hits, their world will start to crack. 3 weeks passed like slow-burning kindling. I didn't stir the fire, just waited. I went to work, made my coffee, folded napkins, answered to the same smug customers, and the occasional eye roll from Callista, who still acted like she ran the place. Meredith hadn't spoken a word to me since that awkward dinner. I didn't mind. Silence had become my armor. The morning of the hearing, I left before the sun did. The courthouse was 15 minutes away, but I gave myself 40. My palms were dry, but ready. The file folder in my bag was zipped up tight, just like me. Ellis Granger met me at the bottom of the courthouse steps, sipping from a battered thermos and nodding with a kind of reverence that said, "You're not just here to ask for justice, you're here to reclaim it." The hearing room was already half full when we walked in, and not just with attorneys or court personnel, but with faces I recognized from my past. 2 waitresses from the cafe, the old florist across the street, even the local newspaper editor who once interviewed Meredith for some Women in Philanthropy puff piece. Callista stood near the front, wearing a sleek blazer she'd probably borrowed from Meredith, and shot me a smug half-smile. Meredith didn't bother looking at me. Her arms were crossed, lips taut, chin lifted like she owned oxygen. Their attorney, a man named Rupert Klein, strode in with the kind of energy that expected applause. He didn't glance my way. He didn't have to. Then the door opened, and the judge entered. A tall, serious woman with short gray hair and a gaze that could level concrete. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and immediately said, "I've read your petition thoroughly, Ms. Reeves. Thank you for preserving this document." My name, out loud, in a courtroom where I wasn't supposed to matter. Every pair of eyes turned. Meredith blinked, then leaned toward Callista and hissed, "What document?" I said nothing. Granger slid the folder forward. The judge opened it. "In today's matter of Reeves versus Reeves, we are here to review the authenticity and legal standing of a last will and testament allegedly authored and signed by the late Mrs. Eleanor Reeves." The judge paused, then continued reading, her voice crisp and unwavering. "To my daughter, Kalis Reeves, my youngest, I leave my home, the Reeves Garden lot, the trust account jointly built with her father, and all remaining assets, without reservation." Callista's mouth parted just slightly. Meredith blinked twice, then gripped the edge of her chair. "This will," the judge continued, "was notarized, witnessed, and dated approximately 13 months before Mrs. Reeves passed. It bears no indication of coercion or duress." Rupert Klein rose, scrambling. "Your Honor, we were never made aware of this version. The family operated under the assumption—" "The assumption," the judge cut in, "is not the same as legal proof." Silence. I opened my folder and pushed forward a small envelope. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to submit an additional recording and affidavit." The judge nodded. I glanced at Meredith once. Her jaw tightened. "It's a voice memo, Your Honor, dated 8 months before her passing. My mother was concerned." Granger tapped his laptop and played it. My mother's voice, clear, tender, a little shaky, filled the room. "If something happens to me, I need Kalis to have everything. I know Meredith. She's always wanted Callista to be the face, but Kalis has the heart. She won't waste it. A few people in the back gasped. One woman even covered her mouth. I added, and this... I placed a second page down, signed and dated. Is an affidavit confirming that my mother revoked Meredith's power of attorney 3 weeks before her passing. Meredith shot up. You're lying, she barked. This is nonsense. She never trusted you. She called you a disgrace. Rupert touched her arm, trying to pull her back down. The judge didn't move. She just said calmly, Mrs. Reeves, this is a courtroom, not your kitchen. I felt my knees lock. My spine straightened. In the back, someone whispered, Wait, Meredith lied? Another voice, lower, more venomous. That poor girl, they nearly stole everything. Whispers turned into quiet murmurs, then low buzzes of judgment. One man near the aisle muttered, This is going to be tomorrow's front page. The judge raised the gavel. I have reviewed all submitted documents and verified timelines. I rule in favor of Kalis Reeves. The will is valid. Effective immediately. Ownership of the Reeves estate, property, trust, and assets shall transfer to her. The gavel came down. The sound echoed like thunder through the wood-paneled room. Meredith stood, face red, eyes wild. She's a waitress. What will she even do with all this? The judge didn't look up right away. But when she did, her words were simple. Hopefully something better than mockery and theft. And with that, she stood. People began gathering their things. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped. The energy shifted, completely. Callista still sat frozen, as if trying to process the loss in real time. I walked over slowly. She noticed me only when I stopped right beside her. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and held it out. What's this? She asked, her voice hollow. A letter, I replied, quiet but steady. From the new property owner. She opened it. Her lips moved as she read. Then her head snapped toward me. You're evicting us? I didn't answer. Her eyes flared. That's our house. It was, I said. Now it's mine. The room was almost empty now. Even Meredith didn't argue. She simply slumped back in her seat, staring down at the floor, like she finally understood what losing looks like. As I stepped into the hallway, the courthouse doors felt lighter than they had 3 weeks ago. The air felt warmer. I hadn't smiled all morning, but as I reached the last stair and heard no footsteps behind me, I let the corners of my lips turn up. And as they stood there, stunned, I turned and never looked back. I walked through the courthouse doors into the sunlight, not just free of their noise, but finally free of their version of me. There wasn't any celebration, no loud declaration of victory, just quiet steps, a calm breath, and a heart no longer weighed down by trying to be loved by people who only saw what they could take. It had been a month, 30 quiet mornings where I no longer woke up bracing for a new attack. I slept better, I laughed again. I was still working, because life doesn't pause, but this time I chose where and how. And today? Today, I chose closure. I parked a block away from the restaurant, the same one where I'd wiped tables while they laughed at me, the same one where Callista showed up in heels too high for her lies. But this time, I wasn't wearing an apron. I was in jeans and a soft gray sweater, holding my old uniform folded neatly in my hands. As I walked through the door, a few heads turned. Some faces I recognized, others new. No one said anything at first. Then the manager, Brian, stepped forward. He didn't smile, just shifted his weight like his shoes suddenly didn't fit. Kalis, he said, his voice lower than usual. We heard what happened in court. I looked him in the eyes. I figured you might. He nodded, lips tight. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For not listening. For making assumptions. I didn't need his apology. Not really, but I appreciated it. So I gave him a small smile and walked past him toward the break room. I pinned a note to the corkboard. Just one line. To every woman told she's less than, you're not. Then I placed the uniform on the shelf beneath it. I didn't slam it down. I didn't make a speech. I just let it go. As I turned to leave, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Kalis? I knew that voice before I turned. Callista. She stood in the hallway like a shadow trying to find its shape. No makeup, no dramatic hair. Just her. Raw, tired, maybe even human. I didn't know, she said, her voice unsteady. I didn't know Mom changed the will. I thought, you didn't want to know, I said gently, not accusing, just stating a truth we both had danced around for years. She swallowed hard. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, I just finally love myself more than I love your approval. She looked down, and for a moment, I saw the little girl we both used to be. When we played pretend and made up worlds where moms didn't choose sides and love wasn't conditional. But those games were long gone. I stepped around her without another word. Some things didn't need to be said anymore. That evening, after dinner, I pulled the old lockbox from the back of my closet. I'd almost forgotten about it. It had sat untouched since Mom's funeral, tucked beneath scarves and winter coats. I opened the latch, and inside was a small velvet pouch and a leather-bound journal with a note in her handwriting. My name. Just that. Nothing else. I opened the pouch first. A necklace. Silver chain, delicate with a small pendant, an opal. My birthstone. I'd never seen it before. It was beautiful in a quiet way, like something someone had picked out long before they knew how much it would mean. Then I opened the journal. The first page was dated over a year before she passed. To my Kalis, you were always the strong one. I just wish I told you more. I read for hours, letters from a woman torn in ways I hadn't understood, struggling to show love in the mess of loyalty and guilt and fear. She'd known about Meredith, about the way Callista talked to me, and she'd written it all down, not for herself, but for me. I cried, not the kind of sobs that rip through your chest, but quiet ones that let something old and rotten wash away. I didn't feel angry. I felt whole. The next morning, I took a different route to work. I drove past the courthouse. Meredith's car wasn't parked in its usual spot. Her name, once proudly painted on the banner outside the town's women's charity, was being scraped off by two men with ladders. One of them muttered, "Another one bites the dust," and I kept driving. 2 blocks down, I turned onto a quiet street and parked in front of a small building with fresh paint and a new sign. Reeves Interiors, built from the ashes. It still made me smile every time I saw it. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, every inch of it. I walked through the glass door and breathed in the scent of new floors, soft leather samples, and hope. Sunlight poured through the window, and as I adjusted the necklace around my neck, I caught my reflection, tired, but proud, not of what I'd won, but of what I'd survived. And as I turned to the small team I'd begun hiring, 2 young women just getting their start, I realized something deeper than victory. I was finally safe. Sometimes they push you to the ground just to feel taller, but when you rise quietly, they never see it coming.